Today, most people break easily. One setback, and they lose discipline. One betrayal, and they give up on loyalty. One rough season, and their identity collapses. We live in a world where strength is fragile, and commitment is temporary. But 1,000 years ago, there lived a Viking king who survived far worse than anything we face today. Exile, hunger, rejection, war, and still rose to become one of the most unbreakable men in history. His name was Harald Hardrada, and the reason he never broke was because he lived by one Viking rule, a rule so powerful that it can still transform a man's life today. In this video, you're going to learn that rule, the exact principle that made Harald impossible to break, and how applying it in the modern world can reshape your strength, your discipline, and your identity. Chapter 1. The night his life fell apart. When Harald Hardrada was just 15, he learned a truth most men don't discover until their entire life is broken apart. Strength isn't built in comfort. It's built the moment everything you depend on collapses. The year was 1030. Winter had wrapped Norway in a cold, unforgiving silence, and a young Harald stood on a battlefield watching his world die in front of him. His older brother, King Olaf, had just fallen in a brutal clash known as the Battle of Stiklestad, a battle that was supposed to restore their family's power, but instead shattered every piece of Harald's reality. The snow was stained with blood. The air carried the screams of dying men, and the boy who came to war with hope was now surrounded by death, betrayal, and defeat. Enemies were moving in, torches in the distance, the crackle of shields, the whispers of soldiers hunting for survivors. Harald had no army left, no allies, no crown, no home to return to. He had lost everything in a single evening, so he ran, bleeding from cuts he didn't even feel, slipping through snow and mud, hiding between rocks and fallen shields. Harald fled into the forest as the world behind him burned. Every breath was a cloud of pain. Every heartbeat reminded him he was alive and alone. Hours later, he collapsed beside a frozen stream. The cold was vicious. Silence pressed against him like a weight. He could hear the distant howl of wolves, the echo of men searching for anyone who survived. This moment, cold, terrifying, humiliating, was where Harald's real life began. Because while most men break when their world shatters, Harald made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He placed his hand on the icy ground, stared into the blackness of the night, and whispered a promise. "I will return. I will avenge my brother, and I will reclaim our honor." It wasn't a dramatic speech. No one was there to applaud. There was no music, no army, no destiny carved in the sky. Just a boy, alone in the snow, making an oath that would either make him a legend or kill him trying. But this is the moment that shaped him. Not the battles he won later, not the crown he earned, not the armies he led. It was this one night, this one wound, this one broken moment that forged the spine of a man who refused to break for the next 35 years. Harald didn't know where he would go next. He didn't know how he would survive. He didn't know if he would ever see his home again. But he knew one thing: his life now belonged to the oath he made. And that is the Viking rule most people today have forgotten. Lesson: your life isn't defined by what you lose. It's defined by the promise you make after the loss. Harald didn't wait for strength. He chose a direction when he had nothing. Most men today wait for motivation, perfect timing, or emotional clarity. Strength grows the moment you choose a path while you're hurting. Chapter 2. The exile that forged his strength. After the night Harald Hardrada lost everything, he began a journey that would break most men. Not a heroic march, not a glorious return, but an exile, long, lonely, and filled with trials that reshaped him into the man history would one day fear. Harald and the few survivors who escaped the battlefield traveled east, away from Norway, away from home, away from everything familiar. They moved quietly, hiding from patrols, crossing frozen rivers, slipping through villages where enemies waited to finish what the battle had begun. For weeks he survived on scraps, on the kindness of strangers, and on the fire of a promise he refused to break. And when he finally reached the court of Prince Yaroslav in Kievan Rus', he didn't arrive as a warrior, but as a refugee, a boy with no throne, no land, no wealth, just an oath carved into his heart. The prince took him in, but not as royalty. Harald wasn't treated like the brother of a fallen king. He was treated like a man starting from zero, because that is what he was. So Harald did something most men today would struggle to do. He humbled himself. He trained. He fought in smaller skirmishes. He learned new tactics. He studied languages, politics, and military strategy. He worked his way up, not through entitlement, but through discipline. And as the years passed, he joined the most feared fighting force of the medieval world, the Varangian Guard. These were elite warriors, giants with axes, shields, scars, and iron discipline, men who protected emperors, men who feared no battle. But even among these legends, Harald stood out. His commanders noticed that no matter how dangerous the mission, no matter how brutal the conditions, he never hesitated. He never complained. He never broke formation. Because Harald wasn't fighting for gold or glory or survival, he was fighting for the oath he made that night in the snow. Every battle was practice. Every scar was preparation. Every victory was one step closer to reclaiming his honor. During his years in the Varangian Guard, he fought in Sicily, in the Holy Land, across the Mediterranean, and throughout the Byzantine Empire. He lived in tents, on ships, in deserts, in palaces, and on cold stone floors. He tasted luxury and starvation. He encountered betrayal and temptation. But the oath remained the one thing that guided him. Harald saw men stronger than him fall apart because of pride. He saw great warriors lose themselves in alcohol, women, and gold. He saw disciplined soldiers crumble under pressure. He watched men who once stood tall become hollow shells when their lives didn't go as expected. And every time he witnessed that, he remembered the snow, the darkness, the pain, and the promise he made. While others chased fleeting pleasures, Harald chased purpose. While others collapsed under their emotions, Harald mastered his. While others forgot who they were, Harald became more defined. Years in exile did not weaken him. They forged him into iron. Because exile isn't about being far from home. Exile is the part of life where everything feels uncertain, where nothing is guaranteed, where no one claps for your effort, where progress is slow and invisible. It's the season where you become unrecognizable even to yourself. Some people lose themselves in exile. Harald found himself there. By the time he left Byzantium, he wasn't a lost boy anymore. He was a hardened warrior, a strategist, a leader, a man whose identity had been reforged through discipline, pain, humility, and purpose. Exile didn't destroy Harald. It removed everything weak in him until only the oath remained. Lesson 1. Your exile season is where your future is forged. Modern exile isn't a battlefield. It's unemployment, heartbreak, failure, rejection, loneliness, or rebuilding your life from zero. Most men waste that season. The strong use it to sharpen themselves. Lesson 2. Humility is the first step to becoming unstoppable. Harald didn't walk into foreign lands demanding respect. He earned it. Ego ruins more men than weakness ever will. Chapter 3. The Return of the Oath. After years of exile, years of war, years of sharpening himself in foreign lands, Harald Hardrada did something most men never do. He kept the promise he made when his life was at its lowest point. By the time Harald left the Byzantine Empire, he was no longer the wounded boy who fled into the forest. He had become a commander, a strategist, a warrior whose name was whispered in courts far from his homeland. He had earned wealth, gold, allies, not through inheritance, but through discipline and fire. But all of that meant nothing compared to the oath still burning inside him. Harald had fought in deserts and snowfields. He had defended emperors. He had broken siege lines. He had survived storms at sea. He had seen more death than most men see in a lifetime. But the oath remained untouched, unbroken. So, with an army behind him and years of experience carved into his bones, Harald finally turned his eyes back to where everything began: Norway, the land that betrayed his family, the land he fled from in the dark, the land he swore he would return to. And when word reached Norway that Harald Hardrada was coming home, kings trembled, not because of his army, not because of his wealth, but because men who live by an oath are dangerous. They don't bluff. They don't hesitate. They don't negotiate with fear. They are driven by something deeper than ego, fame, or ambition. They are driven by identity. The same nobles who had supported his brother's downfall now faced a man forged by a decade of discipline, a man who had turned pain into power, exile into experience, and humiliation into hunger. When Harald arrived, he didn't sneak in quietly. He returned like a storm. Diplomacy became strategy. Strategy became strength. Strength became fear. And fear became surrender. Through alliances, pressure, and the reputation he built abroad, Harald reclaimed the throne his brother died fighting for, not by chance, but by becoming the kind of man his enemies could not defeat. He stood exactly where he once watched his world collapse. He walked through the same snow he once bled into, but this time he wasn't running. He was home. He was king. He was the living proof that the promise he made as a boy had survived every war, every wound, and every temptation. And here's the part most people miss. Harald didn't rise because life became easier. He rose because he never stopped walking in the direction of his oath. Every battle, every shipwreck, every sleepless night, every betrayal, it all led him back to the moment he promised himself he would return stronger. Most people break their promises long before life gives them the chance to fulfill them. Harald fulfilled his, because for him, keeping that oath wasn't about revenge, and it wasn't even about reclaiming a throne. It was about proving that the boy who fled through the snow didn't die that night. He survived. He transformed. He endured. And now the world had to face what exile had created. The boy who once hid in the shadows had returned as a king who stood unshakable in the light. This is why Harald Hardrada is remembered as one of the most unbreakable men in Viking history. He became the man his hardest moment required him to be. Lesson 1. You rise by returning to the promises you made during your lowest moments. The goals you set when you were hurting are the ones that will transform you the most. Don't abandon them just because life got busy. Lesson 2. A man's identity is built on the promises he keeps to himself. Harald didn't return to Norway because it was easy. He returned because it was who he decided to be. Your future depends on the promises you refuse to break. Lesson 3. Strength isn't in the victory. It's in the persistence. Harald didn't suddenly become strong when he returned. He became strong through every step he took toward returning. You don't have to win today. You just have to keep moving. Chapter 4. The Viking Rule that can transform your life. For years, people have tried to understand what made Harald Hardrada so impossible to break, why he never lost focus, why he never surrendered to comfort, why every setback made him sharper instead of weaker. Some say it was his strength. Some say it was his training. Some say it was his victories in foreign lands. But the truth is far simpler and far more powerful. Harald lived by one Viking rule, a rule older than any throne, older than any battle, older than any king. A man is only as strong as the promise he refuses to break. This was the law he lived by. This was the reason storms couldn't move him. This was why betrayal didn't shatter him. This was why exile didn't weaken him. This was why hunger didn't break him. This was why he rose when everyone expected him to disappear. Because once Harald made an oath, his identity aligned with it. His decisions aligned with it. His habits aligned with it. His future aligned with it. He didn't keep the oath because it was easy. He kept it because it defined who he was. And this is where the modern world begins to fall apart. Most people today make promises casually. They say they'll change, but don't. They say they'll stay disciplined, but drift. They say they'll stay loyal, but get distracted. They say they'll commit, but cut corners. They say they want strength, but avoid discomfort. They assume identity is something you discover, when in truth, identity is something you build. And you build it the same way Harald did, one promise at a time. Harald didn't become a king because he was chosen by destiny. He became a king because he was consistent with his direction. He didn't bend, not to weakness, not to fear, not to temptation, not to circumstances. Every battle sharpened him. Every failure trained him. Every scar reminded him of who he refused to stop being. His oath wasn't just a statement. It was the spine that held the weight of his life. Imagine if modern men lived this way. Imagine if your word meant so much to you that breaking it would feel like breaking yourself. Imagine if you built your habits around the identity you chose, not the emotions you felt. Imagine if you protected your commitments the way Harald protected his oath. A man like that becomes frighteningly stable, predictable in discipline, unmoving in purpose, clear in identity, unshakable in direction. That is what Harald Hardrada embodied, and that is what you can embody if you choose to live by the Viking rule, because the power wasn't that he made an oath, but that he aligned his entire life with it. He didn't wait to feel ready. He didn't wait for the right moment. He didn't wait for motivation. He didn't wait for confidence. He became strong because he walked toward the direction of his promise consistently, even when he had no guarantee it would ever succeed. And here is the truth no one wants to admit. Most men fail not because life is hard, but because they break the promises they make to themselves. They quit when it hurts. They get distracted when tempted. They give up when progress is slow. They fold when they should endure. Harald didn't. He kept walking, kept fighting, kept believing, kept becoming, kept aligning himself with the version of him that he swore he would become. And that is why the world had to face him as a king, not a broken boy. Strength is not a gift. Strength is a direction. Strength is a promise. Strength is a practice. And that Viking rule can transform your life the same way it transformed Harald's. Lesson 1. Make fewer promises, but make them sacred. Your life changes the moment your word means something to you again. Lesson 2. Build routines that honor your oath. Your habits must serve your identity, not sabotage it. Discipline is alignment, not motivation. Lesson 3. Treat temptation as the enemy of your future. Harald didn't fall because he was strong. He stayed strong because he refused to be distracted. And the ultimate rule? A man who keeps his word becomes a man the world cannot break. Because at the end of his life, Harald Hardrada had lost battles, lost friends, lost wealth, lost comfort, but he never lost himself. And that is what made him unbreakable. If this Viking rule spoke to you, if it reminded you of the kind of strength you want to build, then don't let it end here. Take what you learned today and become the kind of man your future self will thank you for. And if you want more videos that sharpen your discipline, your purpose, and your identity, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Until then, stay focused, stay disciplined, and stay unbreakable.